Okay. Hello, hello. It's Mr. Murphy here. I'm gonna go through the last packet, post this on YouTube. Seems like a couple of you had some issues with just a few of the questions. So I wanted to go over them, and then I wanted to just go over the process of natural selection again using a YouTube video that I found. So this is my first stab at that. Um, Last week, we gave you this packet. It's the same basic sort of overview. We want you to highlight the parts of the question that are really important for you to know how to answer it. And then we want you to, for the second piece, do something a little bit different, and that is observe these draft pictures at least, and then put them in the right order. So let's talk about adaptations real quick. All right, it says an adaptation is an inherited trait, a characteristic, or a set of traits that helps an organism to survive in a particular environment. So I know there's a lot of words in there that you don't typically use, so let's really try and think about this. Let's look at it again. It's something that's inherited, so that means it's been given to us from our parents. So we have it. And it helps the organism to survive. So it's something, an adaptation. I know when you think of the word adapt, you're going to think of something changing. An adaptation is a thing. It is a noun. It's like having eyeballs that allow you to see a lot. That's an adaptation, or to see clearly. An adaptation for us is that both of our eyes are in the front of the head. And so that allows us to have depth perception. That allows me to catch a baseball. That allows me to know if a tiger is going to catch me. You know, it allows us to see things in the distance and sort of know how fast they're coming and where they're going to go. So having two eyeballs in front of my head, a lot of predators have that. Like tigers have that as well. That's an adaptation. Having like hands like this, that's an adaptation, right? This is important for my survival. I need to use these to work with tools because tools are important for our survival as a human species. So adaptations are like things or parts of our body that we got from our parents, and they allow us to survive better, you know? So let's go through some of this, right? So there's three types of adaptations. There's structural, like the structure, the shape of something. And then we have behavioral, how something acts, you know, whether or not it dances in order to attract another mate, or whether or not it makes holes in the ground to help it to dig and stay away from predators or whatever. And then there's physiological, and that's like how the body works inside. So if something like a fish has a special way to keep its blood so that way it doesn't freeze. So that is a physiological adaptation. That's something that sort of happens inside of the body. And then we go over these three things, right? So structural is a specific body part, right? A behavioral is a specific action or behavior that helps it to survive. And physiological is a body process that helps it to survive, right? Just what I had said a minute ago. Okay, so let's look at some adaptations of a beaver. So Miss Murdoch made this, and she made this so that way we get a good example here. So here's a couple of beavers, and you can already see some of the structural adaptations that it has to help it to survive in the environment, right? These teeth are adaptations to help it to chew through the wood. I'm sure it's got special muscles in its jaws to help it to chew through the wood and to keep chewing. So right here, we've got a large flat tail to help them to swim. Here's another structural adaptation. We've got big teeth to help them to chew wood. Those are some structural. The behavioral, they beat their tail in the water. They build dams, right? So these are some behaviors of these beavers. And then physiological, their tail actually has fat in them. So that way they can use that fat in case they're starving in the winter. So that's a really nice physiological feature, physiological adaptation, right? And then they also have glands that produces oil and that keeps their fur warm and dry. So that's another nice physiological adaptation. So your task down here was to find some adaptations of the polar bear, which a lot of you did really well so far. Um, so it says 4 adaptations. So I just gave you one as an example, right? The polar bear has white fur to help it camouflage. If I say something like, hey, great job, um, that's just me giving you like a thumbs up for this. And if you want to make things a little bit more clear, if there's a whole bunch of other comments here, just do this. Click the resolve button and that'll go right away. And that lets me know that you're seeing my comments, and then that also sort of makes it less busy on the side for you, I hope. Okay, so just wanted to throw that out there. So you're going to give 4 adaptations. A lot of you looked online for this. If you looked online to find adaptations of a polar bear, make sure that you actually know what the adaptation is before you put it there, because that's going to be important. So that way you can explain it, right? Like you had to do in number 2. So you give these 4 adaptations, 4 things that help the polar bear survive in the icy Arctic environment. And then now we're going to say the polar bear has been moved to the rainforest. Explain if each adaptation from the question in number 1 would help the polar bear survive or not. So these adaptations that a polar bear has are for very cold, icy areas. So now if we put it in the rainforest, a lot of these adaptations are not going to be helpful. So you know what you're highlighting, right? You're highlighting explain if each adaptation for question 1 would still help, right? So this tells you what you're going to do over here. So this is what you should have highlighted right here. And then you're going to explain, okay, so white fur to help with camouflage. Would that help in the rainforest? No, no way, right? So you would say no, and then you would explain why. So no, the white fur would cause it to stand out. So its prey would see it, right? The things that it's trying to eat would see it coming. And if something was trying to hunt it, like maybe humans or something like that, then they would spot it right away. So that wouldn't be good. So you're going to go through these 4. And then number 3 says name a species. List and explain 2 adaptations that helps it to survive in its environment. So name a species, right? That's the first thing you're gonna do. That's the first thing you highlight. And then list and explain 2 adaptations of that species. So a lot of you did this wrong too, because you gave us 2 different species, but that's not what the directions tell you. Too many people are rushing through this stuff to get it done. We only gave you 2 pages to do for the whole week. Please take your time. So name a species. So one student that I just graded did frogs. So they talked about frogs, and then they gave 2 things. Frogs breathe through their skin, which is pretty cool. That's an adaptation that frogs have. And then frogs also have powerful hind legs to allow them to jump and to get from place to place, right? So that's the second adaptation that frogs have. All right, so let's move on. Talk about this guy Lamarck, who had an idea about how species evolve, and then we'll talk about how he was wrong, because we have Darwin, and we know that Darwin's theory of natural selection, that one is the actual reason how species evolve over time. Okay, so I'm going to read this with you. Remember, evolution talks about species changing over time. So let's take a look at an earlier theory of evolution, right? The one that sort of wasn't right, and then Darwin's ended up becoming what everybody paid attention to. So this first guy's name is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. He was a French guy, and he came up with this idea of a theory of acquired characteristics. Acquire means to get, and characteristics are like the traits that we have. So basically what he thought was that traits are we get them over our lifetime. And we know that's not true. We know that we don't just get traits from our lifetime, that we get traits from our parents, and hopefully they're good. And if they're not good, then we don't survive. Or at least things don't survive in nature, right? Humans are a little different. We talked about that in the last packet, because we have medicines and technology and stuff. So here's what Lamarck thought, right? Lamarck thought that individual organisms acquired or got a trait out of want or need. An individual can change to get a trait, and then that acquired trait can be passed down to their babies. So he believed basically if you And this is the example of the giraffes. Like the giraffes wanted the leaves taller in the trees, so they just stretched their neck. And when they stretched their neck got longer, and so the giraffe evolved. Can giraffes do that? No. Can we keep trying and stretch our neck and then pass down that trait to our baby? No, it doesn't work that way. Evolution is not something that happens to individuals. That's something that we're really trying to drive home here. Individual things cannot evolve. Evolution happens because some members die, some members survive, and the survivors pass down their good traits. That's it. So it is something that happens to a species over time. That's why this M made sure to write that in big, bold words. So Lamarck's proven wrong, right? Charles Darwin's theory was that there's differences in a species, right? Some have long necks, some have short necks. The organisms with the favorable variations, meaning the helpful traits, these are those adaptations from page 1. The organisms with the really good adaptations, the things that helped them to survive, they're going to reproduce more, they're going to get more leaves, they're going to survive more, and they're going to pass down those good traits to their babies. And so the next generation 2 of the giraffes, more of them are going to have longer necks because more of the parents with longer necks survived. And so the next generation down is going to be maybe have more of those giraffes with longer necks. And so if that's the case, generation 2 was different than generation 1. The population has changed over time. Evolution. So these favorable traits become more common in the species population, right? Just what I said, because as more parents with the favorable traits survive and reproduce, then more babies have those favorable traits, right? Just so more babies are going to have the long necks in the giraffe example. So natural selection is also called survival of the fittest. We talked about that in the last packet too. Fittest does not mean the strongest. It means the best adapted, those having traits or a trait that helps the species survive in its environment. So being able to swim fast, that doesn't mean you're necessarily the biggest or strongest. Sometimes a fast swimmer is not a big, strong one, but something that can have a thinner body that can glide through the water faster. Sometimes that's better, right? So remember, survival of the fittest is not survival of the biggest. It's not survival of the most muscular. It all depends on what the environment is. It all depends on what's killing off the organisms, Okay, so Lamarck, let's get some examples, right? Lamarck thought that giraffes had short necks. And then since they needed to reach high up in the trees, they stretched their necks to do this. That's what Lamarck thought. Remember, he was wrong. The organisms can't just stretch their necks to get longer. The individuals cannot evolve. Darwin thought giraffes had different size necks, and the giraffes with longer necks had an easier time reaching the leaves. And so they survived more, they reproduced more, they passed down their genes more. Hopefully you're getting this now. And so check this out. Miss Murdoch ended up giving you these pictures, and here's column A, and here's column B. And your task, it says for column A, list the boxes in order. A lot of you sort of skipped this part. I'm not sure why. I guess because you read this second part, identify if that was Darwin or Lamarck's theory, and you thought that was a little bit easier for you, so you just did that and forgot about the first part, but you have to highlight both because you have 2 tasks here. You've got to make sure that you do that. That's why that we're asking you to highlight, so you don't forget parts of the question. So for column A, list the boxes in order. So you're highlighting that. And then identify if that was Darwin or Lamarck's theory. So you're highlighting that too. And so a lot of you would write something like this. This is Lamarck's because it says that the giraffes all evolved or something like that. And then I will give you a comment like, you need to put column A in order, please highlight like we asked, or something like that. Don't resolve that until you do it. And that's a nice little reminder that you can change it. So let's, we go up, okay, column A, it says, number 1 says giraffes had to stretch their necks to reach the higher leaves. The second one says the stretched neck trait was passed on to their offspring, resulting in long necked giraffes. That one seems like it maybe sort of at the end, right? In time, the giraffes stripped the lower branches bare so that only the available leaves were higher up. Back when there were plenty of leaves to eat, giraffes had short necks. So you're putting these in order and trying to figure out if this was Lamarck's or Darwin's. So you got to scramble them all up. I'm not going to do that for you, but you can do that. I know you can. Let's check out the other one. So B, in time, the giraffes stripped the lower branches bare so that only available leaves were higher up. And notice how there's 4 small giraffes and then 1 longer giraffe. So there's differences in the giraffe population. So that should give you a clue into whose theory we're talking about here. The shorter neck giraffes began to die off, and the longer neck giraffes survived and multiplied. Again, this should sound like somebody's theory that you know about. Eventually, only long neck giraffes were left. That one definitely sounds like at the end, right? And then 4 is back when there were plenty of leaves to eat. Most giraffe had short necks, but some did have long necks. So that one seems like more the beginning, doesn't it? So you can figure this out. You can do this. Make sure that you put the order, 4, 2, 1, 3, or whatever. Just make sure you put them in the answer here. Okay. And then the other thing that I wanted you to notice is that a lot of people are confusing what this adaptation is. They're doing a quick Google search, copying and pasting, and it's wrong. And it's wrong because there's a sort of an everyday, non-scientific way to talk about something adapting. And then there is an adaptation, the way that we're talking about here, for evolution. And this answer is right up in the reading, right up on page 1. Talks about adaptation. That is the first sentence that's given to you on page 1. So please go back and look through the reading when you're doing this before you do a Google search. I know that it takes less time to do a Google search, but we make these readings so that way you can understand them, and so that way you can really start to get a better understanding of how this stuff works. Doing a Google search doesn't help you out nearly as much as looking back in the reading first. So please try to do that first. An adaptation is not something changing. An adaptation is a noun. It is a thing. We listed some of them about polar bears. A lot of you listed some of them about polar bears and then wrote the totally wrong definition down here, which shows me that you're really not paying attention to a lot of what you're doing, and you're not really understanding a lot of what you're doing. You're just sort of going through the motions to finish the assignment. And that's going to be especially harmful to you as you're spending your time at home, because we can't be in front of you and be teaching you these things and correcting any of your mistakes. You've got to sort of do that on your own now. I'm doing what I can to give you as many comments as possible to try and help you rethink and reshape your answers. But you're going to have to start doing this more on your own, of looking back and double checking your work. Otherwise, other people are going to start doing this. Other people are going to succeed more than you, and they're going to be better off than you later on. And I'm really worried about that as we keep moving forward with a lot of these, sort of digital learning, because we can't be there to help you out, and you're not really helping yourself out, and you're not pushing yourself. And some of you are, you're doing an amazing job, and you know who you are. But there's others of you that are, I think, taking advantage of all this time at home and getting into a place where you're not pushing yourself and we really need to right now. So that's my little spiel there. Just one last little bit. I wanted to show you this cool little simulation. I'm going to turn her off. So this is a simulation about natural selection. You can do it online. It's called the PHET simulation or the PHET simulation. And you notice a bunch of these little bunnies and they're getting eaten by wolves. And so what it's going to show you, okay, there's a mutation coming, meaning something's gonna happen, and some of these rabbits, like the rabbit over here, you see it, she's highlighting the rabbit over here, it had a mutation to where it's getting a different color fur, and that fur is better camouflage. So this rabbit here, this one's going to survive. All those white ones, they were easy to spot, so the wolves can come in and they can kill them off. But the brown ones are much harder to find. They have better camouflage, so they're going to survive more. And look at these next generations, right? Look at these next generations. We've got over time, we've got lots more brown bunnies. We had white bunnies, and the bunnies now are brown bunnies. That's evolution. They didn't change like Lamarck, right? They didn't just like really try to make their fur a different color. It's just the ones that had a different color, they survived more. And the ones that didn't have the different color, the ones that were white, they died. And so after generations, we've got a lot different, like this generation is way different than the first one, right? The first one, if you want to look back here, they were all white, and now we got this generation, much more of them are brown. And so that's evolution. Evolution is just the change over time, okay? Change over time of the population, right? Some members have better traits, better adaptations. Some members don't. Those that don't have the good adaptations, they are not fit for the environment, and so they don't survive. And the ones that do have the good adaptations, they pass them down, and the next generation is different. All right, I'm going to close up this video. Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with me. If you have done this so far, I appreciate your time. I hope you're doing well. This is Murphy signing out. Get that work done.